for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of the book Deal With It, no other than Mr. Bruce Dowbiggin.
How you doing? Good to be with you.
Fabulous, fabulous like you, Mr. Bruce. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Well, I've been in the business of journalism and writing for about 40 years, maybe over 40 years now. I've done books, I've done plays, I've done poetry, I've done uh, radio, TV, all sorts of things. And The Deal With It is my 11th, I think it's my 11th book, and I've got another one hopefully in the pipeline coming up. And most of them have been concerned with sports, although I've done a couple of biographies and things like that. I was voted the Sports Broadcaster of the Year in Canada for 2 years, 1993 and 1996. And I've had a couple of my books win awards or be shortlisted for awards. So yeah, so when I saw the title of your podcast, I said this is one that I've got to be on.
Award winning author, Mr. Bruce. Thank you so much for sharing your books to the world. So, where do artists typically find inspiration for their work?
Well, when I was approached to do a book the first time, I said, "Oh yeah, I'll do that, and I'll grow a third eye in the middle of my forehead." I thought, how can I do a book? At the time,
Yes.
I was hosting sports at 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock for the Toronto bureau of the CBC. I was a busy guy. I had young kids, and I thought, well, when would I ever get around to doing this?
Yes.
But then I started working on a few stories, and I had material left over that I couldn't put into the stories. On TV, it can be a problem because you only usually get a minute 30 or 2 minutes, so you don't get a lot of your stuff into a story. And so I had stuff left over, and all of a sudden I started thinking, well, if I took those pieces and put them together, that could be the start of a book. And so that's kind of what happened. And I had a story that I was working on TV, an investigative story about labor union corruption. And I thought, well, that's a good place to start. Why don't I do my first book? And that was called Defense Never Rests. And it was about the NHL hockey players and how they sued the league to get their pension money that had been misappropriated.
So, Mr. Bruce, how does the book analyze the impact of major trades in NHL history?
Well, this book in particular, it's the second one I've done with my son, my eldest son. He works for the Canadian equivalent of ESPN, and the first book was about our choice for the top player drafts in history, and that seemed to go well. We got a lot of good press for it, and so we started thinking about a second title. And this one came to mind about doing the trades that everyone remembers, and it's more than just being a hockey fan. It's also kind of a nostalgic thing because depending on your age, there's a famous hockey trade that happened during that period of time that you sort of remember from growing up. And we thought, you know what, we'll try to have a series of those trades that happened when people were younger and they were impressionable, and that they always look upon that and say, well, that was when I became a fan. And so we try to put that in mind as well. And then finally, the idea of what a trade is has changed, not just in hockey, but all the sports. When I was growing up in my teenage years, a trade was, so you send us your guy and I'll send you my guy, and that's it. That'll be the trade. What we have today in the modern world of sports is so complicated. Yes, you exchange players and their contracts, but on top of that, you exchange salary caps, money. You hold back money, you give money, you trade draft picks. The whole thing is a lot more complicated than it used to be. And in some cases, teams will make a trade in which no one is traded, just trading back and forth salary cap space to help them get under the salary cap in their particular league.
So, Mr. Bruce, what are the some of the most shocking trades discussed in the book?
Well, certainly the top one has to be the Wayne Gretzky trade when he was traded from Edmonton to Los Angeles. It's hard to think of an analogy, let's say in the United States, the equivalent of a trade like that. Wayne Gretzky was the hero of the nation. He was a guy who led Canada to all sorts of wins internationally. His team in Edmonton had won 4 Stanley Cups. He was marrying a Hollywood actress. He had, he had the whole profile going on. And for him to be traded shocked people because it was more than just, again, an exchange of players. It was the exchange of a hockey icon. And it was at least for that time, it was an acknowledgement that a small market like Edmonton, which is where Wayne Gretzky used to play, that a small market like Edmonton maybe couldn't afford to compete with Los Angeles. And that's what happened to Wayne Gretzky. He went down to Los Angeles. They paid him 3 times what he'd been paid in Edmonton. He married his Hollywood star, and he has stayed in Hollywood ever since, and has been involved in a lot of other things. And for Canadians, the trade happened just weeks after they won the Stanley Cup. The Edmonton Oilers did. Gretzky was the captain. For Canadians to see it happen that way, they felt like this is terrible for our country. We can't compete anymore. And in some ways, it's kind of parallels what's going on right now politically with Canada in the rivalry that we're having with Mr. Trump.
Certainly. So, what role do team owners and general managers play in a high stakes trade?
Well, in the early days, a lot of the time, the general manager might also be the owner or the person who controls the team, and so it was a little bit different. Now it's so complicated with the salaries when players are being paid tens of millions of dollars. You need what they call capologists, economists, to keep things in line. You need so many other things. And the thing that people have to remember when they look at it from the outside is that the owner is the biggest fan of his team. He bought the team. He's a successful businessman mostly. He's made tons of money. It's not about making money. It's about being in charge of something that was his boyhood hero thing that he thought of growing up. And I've done numerous books about owners, and there's different responses. Sometimes they just stay out of the way. They let the general managers and the coaches do the job. Other times they get very involved, too involved. And when they start involving their heart, how they feel about their team as a fan, this is oftentimes when a team goes badly. Edmonton was an example of that with Wayne Gretzky, but there's lots of others. I did a book about 6 or 7 years ago about the Vancouver Canucks, the best team they ever had. They got within a game of the Stanley Cup. But their owner started to get nervous because they didn't seem like they were going to turn the corner. The fans were getting restless, and he basically panicked and fired his general manager, and the team has not been the same since.
So, Mr. Bruce, let's talk about the impact on teams and players. How have these trades affected the teams involved in the short term?
Well, some of the most famous trades that were supposedly made, like the Gretzky trade, were made to win a Stanley Cup. The Los Angeles Kings were trying to win a Stanley Cup, and as famous as the Gretzky trade is, he never won another Stanley Cup after he left Edmonton. But some of the guys who were traded to Edmonton from Los Angeles, lesser known players, they did win Stanley Cups. So sometimes the idea is to add to a team the final piece that's needed for a championship team, but it often doesn't happen. And as I say, in the Gretzky case, other trades in the book that we point out, Doug Gilmour being traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs, he was supposedly the guy who was going to finally push them over the top, get them their first Stanley Cup since 1967. That never worked out. But some of the secondary players in the trade, they won Stanley Cups somewhere else. So it's not a guarantee that you're going to get a Stanley Cup. It's a chance at it. There's other guys though, and we have these trades in the book. We talk about Mark Messier, who was Gretzky's teammate in Los Angeles. He went to the New York Rangers, got a Stanley Cup there. Patrick Roy was a famous goaltender in Montreal. He was traded to Colorado. He won two Stanley Cups there. So there's no guarantees that you're going to get what you want. The other thing is that you have to look at the other side of the trade. One team obviously wants a star, wants a big name. You have to look at what the other team wants, though. And sometimes now, as I said before, they want a little bit of relief contract-wise. They think they're paying too much for their players. Sometimes they need to change the kind of team they have. Sometimes it'll be a team that's a fast team and they want to get more physical, or vice versa. So you have to look at both angles of a trade. And one of the things that we've done with the book, and that we've gotten a lot of good feedback about, is that we take the trade from the beginning of it all the way through to the end of the careers of the players who were involved in it. So usually there's a time span of 15 to 20 years that we're dealing with when we do a chapter on one of the trades.
So, Mr. Bruce, how do players typically react to being traded based on examples from the book?
A lot of the time they react poorly, especially if it's the first time they've ever been traded. They feel loyalty to the team that drafted them and developed them. They can't believe that they've been thrown overboard. I know one particular player who was traded in 1964 from Toronto to New York. And I remember talking to him 40 years later, and he was still hurt. He was still upset about how he'd been traded and that they let him go. The other part is that people don't know. Fans, of course, we're emotional. We want our team to win. We don't think of players as human beings. We think of them as athletes. And when a player is traded, it involves so much. Then you have to sell your house. You have to get your kids out of a school. You have to, if you have a girlfriend in a particular town, how are you going to work it when you're in somewhere far away? So there's all those other logistics that come into trades. But for some guys, they're willing to pay a price of being relocated if they're going to win a Stanley Cup. And almost all of the players that we talk about in the book thought they were being traded to get a Stanley Cup, and so they put up with a lot. There's a funny story in the book about Doug Gilmour, who was playing for Calgary at the time, and he was in his hotel room, and he heard some talking in the next room, and he went and he listened under the door, and he heard in the next room it was the general manager of his team talking about trading him. So he knew he was going to be traded soon. But you can only imagine that you listen under the door and you hear your boss planning to basically fire you, and what that's like to your pride.
Certainly. So let's talk about the historical and cultural context of the book. How have NHL trade policies changed over time?
Well, they've become more liberal, as I say. You can trade more things. You have more things to exchange. Obviously, trading a player for a player is an important thing. You need a center or a goalie, and you're trading for that. But the other part, as I say, is the totality of a pro sports business these days is really complicated with by salaries, by team psychologists, by the kind of people who the trainers, etc. It's a very complicated kind of equation, and so the trades are made in a much different context than they used to be. One of the early trades we talk about in the book, the player who was traded basically was on his way down to play a game in Toronto, and he got a call from the general manager, and he said, when you come to the arena tonight, he said, take a left turn instead of a right turn. You're going to the other dressing room today. So, sometimes it could be brutal. It wasn't much fun, but those are the days. Now, it's, as I say, very complicated. One of the things that we've tried to do is talk about how complicated it gets. And in particular, we were talking about the Las Vegas Golden Knights, who were an expansion team who, through a series of 17 or 18 different trades and then a bunch of other maneuvers they made behind the scenes, became a Stanley Cup winner within 5 years, which has never been done before. They were trading for futures, they were trading favors, they were trading for salary cap relief. There's no one trade in all of those trades you go, wow, they went and got a superstar. But they had enough trades that they were able to pull the whole thing together and win a Stanley Cup. When a lot of teams have been sitting there, the Toronto Maple Leafs haven't won since 1967. The New York Rangers have only won once since 1941. All these teams that wish they could win again, and here comes Las Vegas out of nowhere. Boom, they make all these trades and they win.
Yes, indeed. So, Mr. Bruce, what would be your advice for those people out there want to join NHL?
Well, you talk about becoming fans.
Yes, or both.
Well, my first suggestion would be read all my books, buy all my books, and then read them. That would be my first suggestion. Hey, look, I got to make some money.
Certainly.
I got to make some money. But the best thing, and maybe compared to any of the other sports, the best thing to do with hockey is to go and see a game in person. The television doesn't doesn't flatter the game. When you go and see the speed, you go and see the danger, the sticks, the flying pucks, etc. It gives you a real taste of how skilled the players are, and I think that's a great way to start. Um, some people want to have root for the team that's in their hometown. Let's say you're in Chicago and you're just becoming a fan. Well, I'll become a Chicago Blackhawks fan. But you don't necessarily have to. You can be a fan of the best player in the league at that time who plays for another team. As an example, when I was a young man growing up in Montreal in elementary school, I was a fan of the Detroit Red Wings, not Montreal, because Gordie Howe was the greatest player in the league at the time. So one of the things I would say to people is see if you can't become a fan of a great player, because there are so many teams. There's a lot of losing involved in being a fan. I would suggest finding a team that's going to win and probably make your life happier.
Certainly. And thank you for your advice,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Bruce. So, what will be your short term and long term goals in writing?
Well, one of the goals with this particular book, and for people out there who are writing and have written in the past, this is the first time I've self-published a book, and I've really enjoyed the experience. To me, it's the future of publishing. To me, it's the future of writing for authors to control their product. And I think going forward, I'd like to explore that some more. All of my other books were published through publishers, and they did a nice job, but I often found that they didn't have the expertise to promote and market my books. And so with this book, my son and I produced it. And when you self-publish, you're able to bring the book out immediately. As soon as as you're ready to go, it goes out the door, and you've written it. When you're with a publisher, you'll submit a manuscript in, let's say, April, May, or June, and the book won't come out until October or November. And there's a long lag period there, and sometimes you wonder whether the book is going to be as relevant. So this is a way to get your book out right away. It also allows you, because they don't print stacks and stacks of books, they only print on demand. It allows you as an author to be able to go back into the manuscript and be able to change something that's either an error that's dated. One particular example from this book, the last trade in the book that involved Matthew Tkachuk being traded to Florida, he and his best friend on the Calgary team at the time uh, decided they were going to leave the team, and his friend who left the team, Johnny Goodrow, was killed in a bicycle accident in the summer, this past summer. And our book had just come out, and there was no reference in the book to that accident, but we were able, because of self-publishing, to go back into the manuscript, update the book, so that anyone who buys the book from then on sees it as accurate as possible. So I think that's a really good thing for people who want to publish. And my advice is always write. Start writing. Don't people, oh, I've got a book in my head. Well, get it out of your head and put it on the paper, because that's the only way this process works.
Certainly. Good luck to your goals, Mr. Bruce. And we are hoping for more and more and more empowering books like this. So let's talk about memorable trades and moments. What are some of the most unexpected trades that changed NHL history?
Well, I've talked about the Gretzky one already, but in terms of expected trades, when I was a young man, Frank Mahovlich was one of the stars of the league. There were only 6 teams at the time, and so you knew all the players all the time, and they were very famous. And Toronto had a player named Frank Mahovlich who was their star, but he had trouble with the coach. There was tension. Uh, he was productive, but he was having trouble sort of being happy. And so the Toronto Maple Leafs traded him in a blockbuster trade in, I think it was in March of 1968, and it shocked everyone. First of all, of course, was we thought he was a guy who would never be traded by Toronto because he was the face of the franchise. But secondarily, we thought that he going to a team and playing with Gordie Howe and some of the other great players, that would have happened in the past. So it was one that really shocked people, but to a certain extent, it was a good one, because even if you were just a fan of hockey, you saw a great player be able to play better in a different location. That shocked a lot of people.
Definitely. So, what lessons can modern NHL teams learn from the trades analyzed in the book?
I think there's one of the things I would say is don't be hasty, don't move too fast, think through all of the ramifications of trading a great player. In several of the cases, Patrick Roy, when he was in Montreal, he had an argument with the coach and the owner of the team on TV cameras during a game, and the team got mad and said we're trading him. In retrospect, they realized that was hasty. They made a mistake. A lot of other clubs started to say, well, we're close, but we're not getting over the top, so it must be this guy's fault. And they get rid of a player. They attach all their frustration to that player. And so that happens in several instances in the book too. So you want to take your time. You want to think it through. You want to think of the culture that you've got on your team and whether this guy helps it or not. And then finally, just how much he costs, how much it's going to cost you, and can you stay on budget if you make one of these trades?
Definitely. So before we wrap up our discussion today, Mr. Bruce, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, Food 101, in its fifth season, People Fifth Season, with Chef Alessandro, one of the specialty chef in one of the five-star hotel in downtown Toronto. So please do listen to our latest episode. We are reading our letter senders all over the world. So please do listen, Food 101, wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Bruce, if you could undo one trade from the book, which one would it be and why?
Well, it would depend on who I was a fan of, but
For sure.
I if there was one that I think that a team would want back, it's the first trade in the book, and it dates back to 1967, and it was when Bobby Orr was the star in Boston, and the Bruins were able to get Phil Esposito from Chicago. The coach in Chicago got mad at Esposito. Remember, I was just talking about being patient. Well, the coach had lost patience with a guy who was he thought should be a better player. They traded him from Chicago to Boston. He became the best scorer in the history of the league up until that point. And the Chicago end of the trade never worked out. And people to this day just shake their heads and say, "How did that happen? What were they thinking of?" Because it made one team into one of the greatest teams ever, and it took another team and basically made them after runs.
Certainly. Mr. Bruce Dowbiggin. Thank you so much for sharing your books to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
You can go to my website, brucedobigginbooks.ca. All of my books are there, and there's links how to purchase them and find them. That's one place. I also have a website called Not the Public Broadcaster. I used to work for the CBC, and they were the public broadcaster. So when I made my own website, it's called notthepublicbroadcaster.ca, all one word. And you can go and see all of my sports and my other writing there.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Bruce Dobiggins because if you support him, more empowering sports books to come. So, Mr. Bruce, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and I'll be sure to put that out on my website, my conversation with you, and put a link out there so people can see this conversation.
Certainly, Mr. Bruce. More to come, people. See you soon.